And then lastly, our final project, part 3, a display poster. So this one is going to be sort of in between the first two, where we're going to have a little bit of creative freedom and having some specifics with sizes, really more specifically, and using the logo. So for this piece, we're going to be creating a poster for a shopping mall advertising display case. I'm sure we've all seen these as we go to the mall. They have usually like a mall map and then some kind of ad, give or take like a movie poster-ish size, you know. Sometimes they're backlit. But what we're going to be doing is, for this case, we're going to be creating a poster for a shopping mall display case. Again, the client is Origins, an all-natural beauty product manufacturer, which actually exists. The company recently released a line of skincare products for men. So what we're going to do is, you know, traditionally, I'm trying not to get too heavy into my advertising background, but traditionally, the male market for skincare, it's shifting a lot now, but the male market for skincare is generally sort of highly coveted, but also super, super tricky to advertise to. Now with ads and commercials getting a lot weirder, you get, you know, the crazy Old Spice commercials, and you get that like Gonzo style advertising. You can get a little bit crazier, a little bit more fun. You know, there's also a lot more, you know, sort of self-care products for men is also not as, I guess, taboo, for lack of a better word, as it was. It's not so whatever, looked down upon, I guess, whatever. Anyway, traditionally a tough audience to reach for this type of product. I'm not going to read this whole thing, but we have, this is a part of our description from their story, a little bit of background about the company. Basically, the company is founded on principles of sustainability, fair practice, being unique. I'm trying to think, the best, you know, high quality ingredients for the best care for yourself. So the look of the poster needs to reflect the attitudes of the client and the perceived target audience. I know you have, you know, obviously men as a target audience, but if you want to have a little bit more specific in mind, that is up to you. But the perceived target audience, as this is a poster to be displayed in the mall, it will need to reach an audience quickly and effectively. You have a little bit more, you know, again, not to get too into specifics with advertising, but you have things like reading time, where like with our column ads, generally column ads are just done kind of like quick and dirty because they're usually pretty cheap, but they're also with, you know, a billion other ads, so they're just kind of, you know, you have maybe like 2 seconds to look at these things, so they're just like super, super quick. Your reading time is very, very limited. Something like a billboard, you know, your reading time is literally like a second or two maybe while a car's driving by, so that's why you see billboards are usually like super simple, super effective. A display poster is kind of unique in that you have this sort of, you have longer reading time than you think you do, but you still have to sort of grab attention because you're walking, right? So you're not traveling at like 75 miles an hour on a highway, right? And generally you can kind of see them, you know, from down the hall, kind of like they're rather large. So as you're walking down, you know, down the mall, you know, you kind of see this thing, and like I'm sure, I can't remember the last time I actually went to the mall, but I'm sure, you know, like next time you're sort of around these things, like think about like how much you pay attention to these things and like, you know, how much you actually read them. So if you know, you might have somebody take, you know, 2 or 3 looks at these things really quickly. So you do have, in that sense, there's so much else going on. You do have sort of a limited reading time, to catch your audience. You know, so it's this weird, unique, you know, it's not like a handheld thing, but it's also not something that you're traveling past, you know, at ungodly speeds. It's where you have a few seconds. Anyway, so you have to keep in mind, like, these things need to grab the attention of the audience quickly and effectively. Our poster size is going to be 24 by 36. We're actually working in a 6 by 9 space so that we don't have these giant unruly files. For this assignment, we're going to have to be aware of the trim area. This is the space where the printer cuts down posters. You need to be sure that important information fits within the safe zone of your design. The safe zone is the area in which text elements are guaranteed not to get trimmed. I'll talk about this a little bit more specifically, and I have a template for this, so you don't have to set this one up. That's where the restrictions are on this one. So you're using the template for this. You will be provided a template to lay out your poster. The crop area is set so that your full design will be shown. I want to see all the artwork, including bleeds, and I'll talk about that if they're going to be used. Export your file as a JPEG, saved as last name, origins, and I'm also going to have the Illustrator file again, but I'd like you to export these just for quick viewing later. And I will show you some of the stuff I'm actually talking about. So we have our template here. So when we talk about trim and bleed and safety, these might be new terms for some of you. They may not be. So we have the trim. Where's my mouse? There it is. The trim is basically what the finished size is going to be. And generally, when you print, you're printing on a printer is printing on like giant rolls of paper that are getting cut down. So obviously, the print sizes or their media size is rather large. I'm looking around the room. So for like the posters here, let's say for argument's sake they're 2436. They would all have a bleed size, which basically is if you want color or image to go to the edge of your paper, you want to have it extend beyond. The finish. So we have here, and I left the info here. So you have, this is what would be your bleed, and then I have card by accident. This would be your trim. So this would be the finished size. So your blue area here would be what is your finished. What would be your finished size? So this would be effectively your 24 by 36. And then this is a safe zone because what ends up happening is when these things print and get cut, since they're on rolls and they're going through all sorts of machinery, sometimes there can be shift to where it can shift right or left. This is your trim, but it might actually shift a little bit to where it cuts here and here, you know what I mean? So if you had an image that you wanted to go directly to the edge and you just had it go to your trim and it shifts to the left a little bit, you could end up with basically like a white line on this side. And I'll show you what I mean just with a simple color. So let's say we wanted our headline area. Let's say we wanted this block of color. There we go. This should be locked, but there we go. Send it behind. So let's say we wanted this block of color to go across the whole top of the ad, right? So if we just had it set up to the trim, when this exports or when this gets produced, again, if there's shift, and let's say during printing it shifts to the left a little bit, when it cuts down here, you're going to end up with a little bit of a white line going down the edge of your page because of that shift. So that's why companies will often have bleeds, and generally it varies, but they'll have a general bleed would be at least a 1/4 inch on all sides, so that equals a 1/2 inch total because you have a 1/4 on the left and a 1/4 on the right, so you have a full 1/2 inch bleed. So what you want to do is the bleed basically guarantees you want to stretch your image or graphic. I just left this blue color just to have it as simple as possible. So now you have it extend to the bleed so that no matter what, if there's a little bit, if there's like an 1/8 of an inch even, which is a pretty high shift, if there's an 1/8 of an inch shift, it's not going to matter because you have, all of this, basically this extra space is bleed. You have this extra space that bleeds off of the edge. So if it does shift an 1/8 of an inch to the left and it cuts, let's say right in between the trim and the bleed, it's not going to matter because your color went all the way to the bleed, so you're not going to end up with an awkward misaligned cut. That being said, it can also shift a little bit. Usually safety areas are pretty well regulated. Again, tolerance in shifting isn't too bad. But you want to make sure with safe zones, if you have logos or text or anything like that, you want to make sure that it falls within. You can kind of usually butt it right up against the safe zone. But if you had, I don't know, whatever. Did I actually type? So we have our important info. You know, you have your important information like a logo or something like that. You know, if you had it go, again, this is your, I'm just going to change this color just so we can see it. I did not want to do that. There we go, just so we can see that, the trim. So let's say, like, yeah, again, this is our finish. The green now line is our finish. And let's say we had our, you know, okay, this is the finish, so that's 24. So I'm just going to kind of nudge this in a little bit so it's away from the edge. So if you weren't paying attention to the safety area, again, if we have shifts a little bit, you know, there's potential for that eye to get cut off, right? Or if it's a logo or anything like that. So that's why we want to make sure that we keep things like well within, you know, within that safe zone. For me, just as a, I don't know, a goofy thing that I do, like even if I'm having something right up to the edge, I'll kind of butt something up against the edge of the safe zone, and then I just kind of nudge it in a little bit just to give myself a little extra safety. So if you have, you know, this info here like this, and it actually does get cut off, that's on the printer, because everything, you know, I've had that happen where, you know, I've had cards made or something like that, and I've had, you know, contact info or something like that well within that safe zone, and it's gotten cut off before, and then you have to go back to the printer and say, hey, look at my file, I have that well, you know, within the safe zone, and they were like, oh, yep, that's our mistake, and they reproduce the job and all that fun stuff, and everybody's happy. So these are important things to consider when we're looking at these display posters, and then I'll show you some samples. Oh, and then we have the images. I forgot to show you that. So we have some samples, and these are sort of past student samples. Bless you. So for this assignment, you know, the images, except for the product images, any other images are up to you. The logo is provided. I have images provided. Some of them are a little bit low res, don't worry about that. But I have these images provided with clipping masks on them, so you can sort of overlap like this, so you don't have to worry about creating your own clipping masks or anything like that. But again, you have a little bit more freedom here. You have some restrictions with sizing and with what images you can use, but, well, product images, I should say, but other images are completely up to you as long as they're relatively, the resolution is good. And you can see here, we have pretty simple. You have your headline, your image, and then your sort of shower scrub. But you get this sort of like gym reference. I might stylize this a little bit more. You know, it's just kind of placed at the top there. Play with the headline a little bit more. But you can see the logo. Logo, headline, products works fairly well, fairly clean, simple. Here, this one was done around the holidays, so that's why this sort of has a Christmas-ish theme. But again, they wanted to go a little bit more simple, but the headline works. You have the products. I might make the products a little bit bigger, but you get this sort of Christmassy theme, holiday theme, with some of the ornaments and things like that. You know, again, you can make them slightly bigger, but you don't want to go too big. There's a good balance point, or a tipping point to where the balance shifts. But I feel like there's a good balance between positive and negative space here. They used a lot of negative space on purpose. To give you a lot of this white space, you know, a lot of this negative space to set off the products and their headlines there. This one, I actually really enjoyed this one, but I'll tell you the but in a second. You know, this one, just to sort of lightly critique a little bit, I might, you know, I like how they had this gradient sort of fading off the bottom, so it gives you a little bit more of a solid background to play with. I might make the products a little bit bigger, bump these up just a touch, if you're going to have something like this, where something overlaps like that, I would, make sure it looks like you did it with like an intent rather than it just kind of like sort of placed there. I feel like either push that up just a little bit more or have this black line come down a little bit more. But anyway, I felt like this was a super effective, really good ad. The only thing that would be like if this went into actual production, if you didn't have permission, that's Alex Rodriguez. I didn't know it when I first saw it either, but it was from a different article that they found. But if this were to actually go to production, you obviously need permission to use the photo of the person that it is. But if this was just like generic model guy, I would totally run with it. But again, you get the idea. I felt like it was pretty simple, very effective. This one, again, relatively simple, pretty effective. Went with a little bit of a pop culture reference for this to try to hit a specific type of audience. Went with a sort of Fight Club reference, which works really well. The other reason I show this is because it's a really good example of using that bleed and also offsetting, offsetting elements. All of these, whether we personally like them or not, all the elements are placed with intent, right? And they're kind of offset here. This line with these graphic bars, they're offset very purposely, very intentfully. And then you have these lines go all the way to the bleed and then end before the trim, so you have this nice bit of white space. Really nice sense of balance within this ad. This one, potentially a little bit text heavy for a display ad, but visually I think works really well. You have the logo top left, and then you have this really nice image element sort of bringing your eye down, from the split of the trail here, bringing your eye down to this text, and then it's an easy shave or easy slider shave lubricant. I might pare this down a little bit just so that it is really just kind of more basic information, so you know exactly what it is. And then you could even break it down so you have, this is more of like a headline or a tagline, rather large, and then have what the actual product is. And then if you wanted to include this block of text, make it a little bit smaller, because again, these are going to be 24:36, and this takes up almost all of the 24-inch width. But bring this down if you wanted to include it to maybe, so it's like this, give or take, this area here, but then you have your tagline and then what the actual product is at the bottom. But visually, I feel like it works really, really well. It brings the eye, the image that they chose brings the eye down to the product. They focused on one product. The Origins logo is an Illustrator file. If you're going to choose a different color, they chose this sort of orangish color, just so it pops out from the background a lot more. But they actually chose this from some of their color palettes that they use on their website, which I'll show you. So if you're going to choose a color, I would choose a color that fits within their sort of design aesthetics. Like I wouldn't do, some crazy hot fluorescent pink color just because it looks cool. Again, stick with their design palettes. That's why they chose this orange, because it was within their design palettes. And you'll see, again, we're going to do a little bit of research, but you'll see their look and their sort of attitudes. This one, I felt could go either way. I chose to show it because I do like that, it's pretty text heavy, but it's also got a really good design balance. I might make this whole area a bit smaller, so that you can bring up the products. Maybe not include so many products. You could maybe cut out 2 or 3 of the products and make them bigger, make the logo a little bit bigger. But I do like how you have this drip element, and then it comes off the page, so this last sort of water droplet goes right to the bleed, so that when it trims, and it's not necessarily an super important element, right? It's just a water drip, so we get the idea. I might make it, again, a little bit smaller. I really like I guess the headline, for lack of a better word, the headline that they have. I like how it's laid out. It gives, sort of juxtaposing sizes here and colors just to kind of break up that text really well. Lastly, and it's sort of nitpicky, I might choose a different image for the faucet or shower head. It does look, I see what they were doing, and then we did talk about it. They were sort of going for the sort of grungier, sort of manly, whatever, gym shower kind of thing, whatever. But it is, I find it slightly off-putting, and I think that's mostly reactions whenever I show this one. It's kind of like, oh, like this weird, gross shower head. Yeah, like we get it, but it's kind of like, yeah, but for an ad like this, I mean, obviously you don't want to go with like a super sparkling clean. But if you went with something in between, an old... exactly. So if you had like, I don't know, maybe not a shower head from like 1970 that hasn't ever been cleaned, but you get the idea. But as far as design balance and as far as the elements, like I feel like it's done really well, and I really like the simple sort of effective use of type here. They went with sort of that stampy, that sort of rubber stamp, sort of masculine. Yeah, that stencil look to give it a little bit more sort of a masculine look, I guess. I don't know if we talked about it or not, but I feel like we could have done without the drop shadow. It's a little bit much because you have drop shadow here, drop shadow here, drop shadow here. Even just leaving the drop shadow on the elements at the bottom and taking them off here, I don't necessarily think they might need it. I think it would read well just fine without the drop shadow there. I feel like it's a little bit much with the text. I feel like there's a lot of drop shadow going on. Maybe take it off of the logo, make the logo a little bit bigger, but you get the general idea for these pieces. I'll show you some of the images that we have. Again, all of these. There we go. And again, a lot of these are a little bit low res. Don't worry about that. That's me pulling them off their website. For the purposes of this assignment, don't worry about the resolution. So you see we have basic product shots, and these are also larger than we'll see them. All of these are clipped out so that when you place them into Illustrator, remember when we go back to our place image, they'll place with this with the clipping mask on them. And then the last one is the Origins logo is an AI file, so we have to keep that in mind that we're actually going to open that in Illustrator. When you use it, you're not going to place that in your Illustrator file. If it actually opens, there we go. So you see it's just a vector file, and you can just copy and paste that right into your ad and scale it. Scale it as needed, and you can make it as large or as small as you need it, and since it's vector, it's not going to break up at all. If you made it ginormous, it's not going to pixelate. And then, just to show you very quickly, when we place our images, we're going to go to, I know we talked about it a little bit, but we're going to go to File, Place. And then now I just have to drive to where my stuff is. And then in Final 3, we have our images, and I'll have all of this uploaded. So we can use these. I'm just going to grab the first one. And then as we hit place, again, we get our little preview. So if you click once, it'll place at the actual size, or if you click and drag, you can kind of generally size it. And you can see they show up. They show up without that white background. They're already clipped out, so you don't have to worry about clipping out those white backgrounds, so that you can have a nice sort of seamless. Again, I'll just grab a random. So you can have these. You can have them overlap without having the white backgrounds overlap the products, et cetera, et cetera. So you get the general idea for setting these up and placing these. A lot of the busy work, like again, the masks have been taken care of for you. Again, for these, you're going to be using only the images that are in the folder. And then again, I'll upload these to our server. Lastly, I just wanted to kind of show you, I have a link in the assignment description. I have a link for their website. Again, do a little bit of research if you're not familiar with Origins. You can see this is just their main page when you get to their website, and then I just did their men's care. So you can kind of see they have like a pre-shave oil and then an aftershave, essentially, face washes, etc., etc. But you can kind of see, click around, again, do some research. You know, you get an idea for their, for their design sense. Even just looking at their descriptions for their products, and even if you go to our values, so you have, there you go, committed to well-being, yours and the planet's. So you kind of see, you get their attitudes. Again, so our ads will reflect the attitudes of the client. Again, do some research, poke around their website, have a look. They're actually kind of an interesting company. They make some decent products. Obviously, I haven't needed aftershave in quite some time, so I don't really use their stuff too much, but if they had a beard oil or something like that, maybe I'd use it. Anyway. But you see they have all sorts of stuff for men, and again, they're general. But you see their sort of color palettes as we get to, like, I don't know, yeah, but that very, like, and then they have, some bolder pops of color depending on what they're using in them. And then some of them are a little bit more thematic, but you get the idea. But a lot of, there we go, so just their homepage. They have a lot of those very cool colors, very sort of, lots of greens, lots of sort of reflective of nature colors, things like that.